Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the regular evening council meeting of June the 27th. This meeting is being recorded live and is streaming. All representations to council, written or verbal, will form part of the public record and be available to the public for viewing electronically or as a written record. Members of the public may access the meeting or participate in the following ways: attend council chambers in person. If you wish to do so, please register in advance of the meeting by contacting the corporate officer at corporateofficer@summerland.ca to ensure there is enough space in council chambers. You can watch the meeting live or recorded at the District of Summerland YouTube channel, youtube.com/District of Summerland. Register in advance to speak during the meeting. If you wish to provide comment during the public comment opportunities found under 8 and 15, please register in advance by contacting the corporate officer at corporateofficer@summerland.ca with your name, address, civic address, and method of participation, whether in person, telephone, or by Zoom. You will be given further details when you register. And fourth, you can request to speak during the meeting. Those who have not registered in advance but wish to speak during the public comment opportunities may be given the opportunity, time permitting. After I have provided everyone who has pre-registered with an opportunity to comment, the floor will be open to those in council chambers and those on the conference line. Conference line can be accessed by dialing 778-907-2071 and entering meeting ID 506-489-9374 and passcode 485186. Corporate officer, do we have any late items to introduce? Are you still doing your notice of motion? Yeah. Okay. I'll just make a note of that. Thank you, Councillor Carlson. So if we could adopt the agenda, please. Councillor Barkwell, thank you. Councillor Holmes, all in favor? Great. And adoption of the council meetings of June the 13th, the regular evening council meeting, and the same date, the public hearing. Councillor Barkwell, with a smile. Seconder? Councillor Traynor, thank you. All in favor? Thanks. Okay. On behalf of Council and the District of Summerland, an immense congratulations to the SSS graduation class of 2022. Each of you, your families, and all the educators and support staff that celebrate your accomplishment with you have every reason to be proud. We wish you the very best in the fall, whether you're taking up more studies, traveling, heading into the workforce, or otherwise. Whatever your choices, it is the right one for you. In the meantime, please enjoy your summer. On June the 15th, I attended the Southern Ontario Local Government Association, SILGA, executive meeting. From the member responses about the 2022 convention in Salmon Arm, it was a huge success and a great learning and networking opportunity. You know, to be perfectly frank, I think some of that exuberance came from being able to meet in person again. All 33 resolutions, except the one that was withdrawn, were carried and will be brought forward again at the Union of BC Municipalities Convention in September. The executive is already starting to plan the 2023 SILGA Convention, which is being hosted by the City of Vernon. My thanks to Councillor Barkwell and CAO Stat for attending the convention. I attended the evening open house about Parkdale Housing Society's plans for a rebuild of the Legion Village Seniors Housing Complex on Dixon Avenue. That also was on June the 15th. The proposed plan shows 88 units for folks age 55 and over, a primary health care center to provide a space for family physicians, nurse practitioners, and allied health workers down below the residences. With the assistance of the Society, as of June the 15th, almost all of the people currently living in the Legion Village have found suitable housing in Summerland, while the new housing is under construction. It is expected that this proposed development will be before Council in August. Earlier this year, I joined the Adaptation Subcommittee of the Climate Solutions Council. On June the 16th, I attended my first meeting to hear a presentation on the Provincial Climate Preparedness and an Adaptation Strategy released by Minister Heyman on Monday, June the 20th. Actions in the strategy fall under 4 key pathways: foundations for success, safe and healthy communities, resilient species and ecosystems, and climate-ready economy and infrastructure. The strategy will be implemented between 2022 and 2025. Which will be implemented, will help communities recover from recent disasters and prepare for climate impacts. I attended a second open house this week on June the 16th, this time on the district's proposed waterfront concept plan. The plan is based on the 2018 Parks and Recreation Master Plan and will set the direction for parkland, beaches, amenities, water activities, and infrastructure along the lakeshore from Peach Orchard Beach Park boat launch to the south end of Rotary Beach Park. It also includes Horse Beach at 16997 Lakeshore Drive. It is expected that the final plan will be before Council also in August. On June the 21st, on National Indigenous Peoples Day, I presented at a day of learning at the Local Government Management Association convention being held in Penticton this year. Those attending were welcomed by Gracie Grey Eyes, an elder with the Penticton Indian Band, followed by the singing of the Okanagan song by Anona Campi. The day, organized by Resilience BC, was about equity, diversion, inclusion, and anti-racism, and included presentations on how to incorporate Indigenous land justice and rights into planning policies. That was presented by Jasmindra Jawandra, who's an advocacy planner living in Saanich. A second session was about understanding cultural humility and cultural appropriateness when conducting community consultations and community engagement with Indigenous, Black, and people of color, IBPOC, communities. That was presented by Michelle Buchholz, who has a consulting company out of Vancouver. She is Indigenous. And then we also heard about the work of the South Okanagan Similkameen Respect Network, a SOICS, South Okanagan Immigrant and Community Services Program. Both CAO Stat and I attend their regular meetings. I presented on my recent lived experience as a Black female mayor and the anti-racial discrimination and anti-racism policy recently adopted by the District of Summerland Council. Although I could only attend the first half of the day, the questions, comments, and stories shared by local government senior management were remarkable. EDI and racism are not easy topics, but clearly people felt they could share without judgment or fear. Although the timing of the Day of Learning kept me from attending local celebrations from National Indigenous Peoples Day, I think it was the perfect day to be talking about decolonization and reconciliation in the work of local government. Later that day, I traveled to Vancouver to attend 2 days of meetings with the Climate Solutions Council. In closing, on behalf of Council, my thanks to District Works and Infrastructure staff for organizing 2022's second one-day recycling depot event. The depot was quite busy both times I was there, and it appears others in the community appreciate the pop-up depot as much as we do. And that's all. CAO.
Thank you, Your Worship. The Giants Head Road, Water, Main, and Paving Project have been awarded, and the selected bid is well within budget. We'll start to see the mobilization of equipment and materials on site in the coming weeks. Substantial completion is anticipated by October according to the construction schedule, and we will organize a short on-site event for Council to officially begin the project in the near future. The Canyon View Road, Water Main, and Paving Project is complete now with the new road surface offering a comfortable and welcoming ride to the Summerland Golf Course, a key tourism asset for the district. And residents can hopefully rest more easily knowing the design should greatly reduce the frequency of water main breaks in the area. The solar and battery storage project bids are in, and I am glad to report that bid pricing is within our budget. We are in discussions with the preferred vendor, and once we award the contract, site clearing may begin as early as Q3 or Q4 of this year. The second online survey for the waterfront concept plan is now closed, and good discussions were had in the public open house on the concept drawings. Currently, the Downtown Neighborhood Action Plan survey is out for public comment until July 11, and we hope to also get some great feedback through that process. We are monitoring lake levels closely at this point, and we are optimistic that we've turned a corner on precipitation with the warmer weather we are experiencing. There is high water table in some areas of the community, and we're seeing some pooling on the ground. So we've put temporary barricades in to guide residents in those locations. Out of an abundance of caution, we've also placed sand at Horse Beach and the boat launch on Wharf Street, and we sent our first post using our Voyant Alert app to advise the community. Sandbags can be picked up from the fire hall during regular business hours. Finally, as a reminder to residents, this is the last full week that property taxes can be paid without incurring a 10% penalty. The actual due date is next Monday, July 4th at 4 p.m. And I close. Thank you.
Okay. Any questions, Council? Councillor Barkwell.
I noticed that the revised solar project bid didn't include fire hydrant and water main, and didn't include upgrading the road up there. Is that no longer necessary, or how is that road in particular? I think at some point somebody's going to come wanting money for improvement to it.
Through the mayor, great question, Councillor Barkwell. It's to do with the interplay and timing of the project relating to the Eco Village. And I actually have our Director of Development Services. I don't know if you have to add to that, Brad, but that's the main reason why we pulled it out, because it'll be more attached and a better timing with that project.
Yeah, CEO stat is correct. Yeah, we are working on the next steps of the Eco Village concept plan project, and the idea with that project was to extend a new road from Otley Avenue via Morrow. So the idea is that would service the solar farm site at that point in time.
So if that project doesn't go ahead, what will it? Is that road going to be needing upgrading? And if the project does go ahead, it won't need upgrading?
Yeah, through your worship to Councillor Barkwell, yeah, I think that would be something we'd have to approach with council at that point in time, whether the road would need to be upgraded to service just the solar farm if the Eco Village project did not move forward for development or not. We could go back to the original plan to upgrade the existing driveway for just our purposes only.
And the water main, and it's a 20 centimeter pipe, a couple hundred meters. Is that not needed anymore, or is that? I mean, I know you don't put water on lithium-ion batteries when they catch fire, but maybe, I don't know. Is there something else?
Through your worship to Councillor Barkwell, yeah, I think that would be something we would talk again with our fire department at the time. Definitely, I think they were looking to have a hydrant up there for fire protection purposes. I think we're all hopeful that the Eco Village project will keep moving forward in some fashion, that water will be brought to that area. Again, if future councils decide to not move forward with that project, we would have to then reapproach it with our fire department and then probably with council at that point in time.
The only other thing I'll add through the mayor is we do have our Q2 reporting on, I think it's July 11th, and when we have the solar project, we'll be able to report on a number of those things as well and get into some additional operational details at that time.
Okay, so we're ready to move on to our first public comment opportunity. Crickets. Okay. 9.1, the first development report, ALC referral application, non-adhering residential use, 6292 Hilborn Street, ALC 65430.
Thank you. So the district has been forwarded an application to the Agricultural Land Commission for a non-adhering residential use. So this application is to permit expansion of an existing additional dwelling at 6292 Hilborn Street. Lost my slides. There we go. The Agricultural Land Commission allows for one principal residence and one additional dwelling up to 90 square meters in size without application to the ALC for properties that are less than 40 hectares in the ALR, like this one. And the existing additional dwelling meets that size requirement. It is 84 square meters, or approximately 905 square feet. But the applicant is seeking to add additional square footage to the dwelling for a total of 144 square meters, which equates to 1,550 square feet. This property is designated as agricultural in the OCP, and the OCP supports confining residential development in the ALR to farm residences and developing a farm home plate to minimize residential impacts. Just to mention that there are draft amendments to the OCP that will be reviewed by council as a separate agenda item this evening. And these amendments would support residential uses that meet the housing, operation, and economic needs of farmers. And it would also continue to encourage the use of the farm home plate or using non-arable lands when siting residences on agricultural lands. This property is zoned A1, agricultural small acreage, and the A1 zone allows for an additional dwelling for farm help as an accessory use. As mentioned, if the draft bylaws for the housing on agricultural lands moves forward as proposed at this meeting, this may change to be a carriage house instead of an additional dwelling for farm help. But in either case, the proposed additional dwelling would be allowed as a permitted use, but would be oversized. So should the ALC application be successful, it would require a variance to the maximum floor area under the bylaw. The applicant has provided a sketch showing the proposed 60 square meter addition to the existing building, which is shown here, and a site plan showing the location of the proposed addition in relation to the existing building and other buildings and uses on the property. So the dwelling is not located within the farm home plate. It's in a separate location that is close to Hilborn Street. And this is a historic siting, as that dwelling has existed since the 1930s. The AAC reviewed this application at their June 16th meeting and provided supportive comments. They did note that it is needed for farm help purposes to support the orchard operations and the amount of tonnage they process. They made comments about traffic considerations on Hilborn, like speed signs, and that made a comment that it was good that the development was close to the road, even though it was not within the farm home plate. The AAC resolved to support the application being forwarded to the ALC. This proposal is seen to meet the housing needs of a bona fide farmer on a property with active farm operations. And it is important to note that particularly when a dwelling is outside the farm home plate and on lands that could be used for farming, that the residential footprint is contained. And as the AAC mentioned, it is considered a positive that the existing dwelling is located close to the road for less impact to the farming operations. So in conclusion, staff is supportive of the application and is recommending that council authorize forwarding this non-adhering residential application to the ALC. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne. Questions, council? All right, would someone like to bring forward a motion, please? Councillor Carlson.
I will move that a non-adhering residential use application, ALC 65430, for an oversized additional dwelling at 6292 Hilborn Street be forwarded to the Agricultural Land Commission.
Seconder? Councillor Holmes? All in favor? Oh, sorry, further discussion? All in favor? Great, thank you. And now on to 9.2, another ALC referral application for non-farm use, 13810 Highway 97, ALC 65479.
Thank you. So the district received another application for the Agricultural Land Commission for a non-farm use. And this application is to permit a cidery at 13810 Highway 97. So the Agricultural Land Commission allows for alcohol production facilities, including cideries, as a farm use under specific circumstances without application. If the criteria under the ALR use regulations is not met, a non-farm use application is required. So for properties that are less than 2 hectares in size, like this one, a cidery must use a minimum of 50% of product from on-site to qualify as a non-farm use. So since the applicant is looking to source more than half of its fruit for alcohol production from off-site, an application to the ALC is required. This property is designated agricultural in the OCP, and the OCP supports strengthening the economic base of the agricultural community and agritourism and direct farm marketing operations as secondary uses. This property is zone A1 agricultural small acreage, and the A1 zone allows for a winery and cidery as an accessory use under that zone. So this application includes a new cidery building that would be attached to an existing accessory building behind Granny's Fruit Stand. And the application also notes that there'll be additional planting on the property, 0.1 hectare of haskap berries and 0.1 hectare of vegetables. And the other buildings on the property are to remain. So this includes the existing Granny's Fruit Stand and the house on the property. The applicants have provided some preliminary site planning details indicating the use of the existing driveway for potential turnaround and fire access, and location of the septic field being just east of the proposed new building. Further site details will be reviewed at the building permit stage to ensure compliance with fire access and building code. And the applicants have been made aware of the fire department's requirements for a 6-meter wide access and 5-meter clearance. But further details on the site plan will be needed, which will occur if this application is successful through the ALC. The cidery building itself is approximately 141 square meters or 1,500 square feet with an additional 440 square foot tasting patio. So it includes a production area, storage, lab, cooler, and tasting room. This application was reviewed by the AAC, and they had some concerns. So mainly their concerns were about the site requirements for access and parking and not having enough room on the property for an additional business. There's also concern noted about the potential loss of Granny's Fruit Stand and some concerns and comments about unfair competition. There were also comments about not having enough land for the cidery use. So ultimately, the Agricultural Advisory Committee resolved not to support this application because it does not conform to the ALC's regulations with regard to parcel size. So a cidery is a permitted use in the A1 zone, and for this site in particular, being located on the highway, it provides an opportunity for additional agricultural-related tourism and supports expansion of a family farm operation. There's also the additional benefit of additional planting on site, although small, on this limited agricultural property. And overall, allowing for an additional use on a parcel will help a family farm and in turn, local producers that will help supply the cidery. So for these reasons, staff are supportive of the non-farm use application and are recommending that council authorize forwarding the application to the ALC. Thank you.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you. Questions from Councillor Traynor and Councillor Carlson to start.
Thank you. I'm just wondering, do you know why the Agricultural Advisory Committee was concerned about the potential loss of Granny's fruit stand? I'm just wondering if they have context for that or how that relates. Because to me, if I was going to a cidery, I think it would be great to go and get food right after.
Through your worship, to Councillor Traynor, I actually was attending this AAC meeting on behalf of Joanne. So I was at I heard a lot of the discussion at the committee. It primarily dealt around the concerns of traffic and parking and access. If the committee's concerns were that the site currently as is quite busy. Granny's is a bit of a tourist attraction already. If you're going to add another use, another attraction, an additional need for parking, it could detract from the existing business, and that was one of their main concerns.
Just to follow up from the district's perspective, though, is there enough room for parking for an additional business there?
Through your worship, to Councillor Traynor, I think that's something that, like Joanne did indicate, we did want to get more detail from the applicant at the next stage of this proposal, and through a building permit process, is fire department access as well as parking. I believe we did ask for a little more information at this point in time. I can't remember. If you can correct me on that, Joanne.
Originally, the site plan didn't show any of the parking. The site plan that they provided shows 13 stalls, although the applicant believes that they have room for 18 on site, but that hasn't been demonstrated on the site plan. So there is potential room for areas where it could go, but again, it would all have to be reviewed in relation to the fire access and the width requirements for that. So at this time, I don't have exact numbers as to how many parking stalls would be required, but they do at least have the 13 that are shown on their plan, and the applicant did indicate that they had room for 18, but that hasn't been demonstrated yet.
Councillor Carlson.
Thank you. I have a couple questions. The first one is maybe for Director of Development Services. Was there any conversation at the Ag Advisory Committee meeting about previous conversations at the Ag Advisory Committee regarding that area being zoned potentially agricultural, industrial, and wanting and encouraging this type of development? Because I know that's been it's been a piece of conversation in past. I'm wondering if it came up again.
Through your worship to Councillor Carlson, no, that never came up.
Thank you. Another question? Just one about, and maybe the ALC needs to answer it, I don't know, around the 50% rule. A couple of things. One, I believe fruit stands are subject to the same rule. Two, who enforces that rule? And do they enforce that rule? And three, do we know whether the ALC is often giving value-added producers these variances to allow them to build on farmland when they're not producing 50% or more of the product on their actual farm that that building is on. So that was 3 questions. You may not have any of the answers, but things that potentially could impact whether or not this is even a viable thing.
Sorry, just to clarify, are you asking about the 50% rule for the cidery or for the fruit stand?
Well, both. First of all, is the fruit stand privy to the same rules technically? And then for the cidery, because that's what this is really about, the last 2 questions, is someone enforcing it? And do we know if this has been granted to other cideries or wineries already in the province?
Just offhand, I can only think of one application for an undersized parcel seeking a winery to be placed on there. And I believe that it was a successful application. I don't like to speak for the ALC in terms of their decision-making process and what they consider, but typically they do have the ability to look at things holistically in terms of a farm unit and how it's operating, not just on that site, but on other sites and how that's going to be supported. But I think all of these applications are really considered on a case-by-case basis based on what is being presented in front of them and what they believe is going to ultimately support agricultural use of the land. In terms of the question about the fruit stand, there is a limitation for retail sales. So in terms of the square footage, where they need to be, they're allowed up to 50% of their floor area to be used as selling other items besides what's being grown on the property.
And just to add to Joanne's response on the enforcement side, I can tell you in my experience that often the ALC relies a little bit more heavily on local governments to do the enforcement dirty work for them, and actually seeking conformance with their own regulations. They really do have a lack of enforcement staff, and they have large regions, and unfortunately they have a lot of issues that do come up. So we do try to work in collaboration as much as we can with their enforcement staff and point out issues to them, but often they are generally, if it's a smaller issue too, they're not able to get to it, unfortunately. So they're relying on our bylaw officers to enforce the ALC regulations, which is not ideal from my perspective.
Thank you. Councillor Holmes.
Yes, thank you. So just further to the concern of the site plan and the driveways and parking and fire access and whatnot. So I get that that will be all dealt with at the building permit stage, but don't we usually have some sort of idea at this point of how that's all going to work and look like? Or does the applicant, I guess, want to know what the ALC thinks before investing too much in the project, or you know, that if that's the case? But on the other hand, it's hard to be comfortable you know, recommending this if you just look at it and say, well, that's not going to work. I don't see how that's going to work. So you know, I'm just trying to figure out where they're coming from.
Through worship to Councillor Holmes, I think we do have to keep in mind that in this type of an application, an ALC application, we're a referral agency. So we cannot control what is submitted to be a complete application to the ALC, because the ALC has their own regulations. We can recommend to the applicant that they provide additional information, especially before it goes before council. But if the applicant doesn't want to provide it, we really have a limited amount of power to say, no, you can't proceed any further without additional information. Now, I think at this point in time, this amount of information that's shown today is probably sufficient for our purposes. In light of this being a non-farm use, we're primarily looking at the use question only. there might be the requirement for variances that will be required by council in the future. Our driveway access bylaw, as an example, might trigger, or the fire access as well, might trigger the need for variances at a future date. At that point in time, we'd be bringing this back before council, but the applicant may choose to try to deal with the discretionary issue of the ALC first before spending any additional money on further site planning for this use. And that's as much as we can do, is encourage him to have good materials for your review for this discussion.
Yeah, see, though it kind of works both ways, because if they have some sort of expectation in the back of their minds that that somewhere down the road that we may grant a variance, and we have no intention of doing that, then we're wasting their time by referring it to the LC. They're wasting their money, So it's it kind of works both ways. But just a comment. Thanks.
I have a couple of questions. In the request for decision, it talks about the cafe and bakery not being in conformance, and that the cidery would bring it into conformance. Is that one of the district's zoning bylaws, like for the A1 zone?
Yes, so under the A1 zone, eating and drinking establishment is only permitted with a winery and cidery use, not a standalone restaurant. So by having a cidery on site, we could potentially be able to bring that into compliance if they were to have a cidery in terms of zoning. There is the other issue with the Agricultural Land Commission and how they view eating and drinking establishments. So that's something that they were encouraged to put forward for an application to include that existing use with their application, but it was not included.
Brad?
Yeah, just to add on to this. So there is a very gray line that happens with the eating and drinking establishments, with a lot of fruit stand uses that are happening throughout a lot of ALR parcels across the Okanagan. And it's a bit of a balancing act in terms of what's the trigger to make something an eating and drinking establishment versus just an auxiliary or an accessory piece of a fruit stand. Fruit stands are allowed in the ALR, but not eating and drinking establishments. So this is the gray line that we're advising them that, hey, if you want to formalize the bakery and cafe as a formal eating and drinking establishment to perhaps enhance that use and formalize it, then we'd recommend that they would put it forward as a non-farm use application. They decided to not go that route, but we still think that for our bylaws, a cidery would help, because then you can have an eating and drinking establishment under our zoning bylaw. That makes sense as an accessory part of that.
Okay, yeah, so you've answered my question, but it's kind of triggered another one. Is the ALC's view of that different from what we have in our zoning bylaw?
Yeah, I can answer that. Yes, that is correct. So right now, an eating and drinking establishment restaurant is a non-farm use application. So even if it's related to and a part of a winery, it can still trigger a non-farm use application. Now, wineries though have lounges or that are bordering, again, that gray area of whether they are a restaurant or not. From our perspective in our zoning bylaw, we're saying that no, you are allowed to have an eating and drinking establishment if you have a winery or cidery, to remove the ambiguity from our zoning perspective.
Okay, got you. And then one other question, and again, this comes again from the request for decision. On the site is this the site plan? Yeah, this is the site plan. On the site plan, going back to the request for decision, it talks about them putting in 0.1 hectare of Hascat berries and 0.1 hectare of vegetables, I think. Do you know where on the site plan, like it doesn't show any spot there? And it kind of seems a little tight, but I'm wondering if I'm wondering if that, having that extra farm production, as it suggests in the request for decision, would make them more favorable, this application more favorable to the ALC. And I know it's kind of hard for you to say whether it would or not, but I'm wondering if, I mean, that's not very much land, and I don't even see where it might fit in here. So is that kind of a moot point in terms of the cidery application? In your opinion, obviously.
I think anytime that you have a small site that is looking to add agricultural uses on agricultural lands, I do see that as a positive. The Hascat berries specifically, I believe, are going to be used in the cider production. So I think that that's a positive. It is a small site overall, and one that does have lots of uses on it. So, in terms of if that's enough, I thought it as a positive for the application. I would assume that the ALC would also see that as a slight positive, whether that outweighs other factors for them. I won't comment on that. In terms of where specifically it's going on site, it wasn't shown on the plan, so I'm not sure, but the applicant is on the line if you would like to ask her specifically what her intentions are.
Thank you. I would like to ask her. That's Ms. Otoya. You're on mute still?
Yeah, I got that. Is it working now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, perfect. Yes, so thank you very much for taking everything into consideration. The Hascat berries and a vegetable greenhouse, a small one, would go in two places. So it's kind of hard to describe if you're not super familiar with our property, but there is a section of land that's actually on the other side. It's beside our pool. It's more on the residential side of our property as opposed to the business side. And there is, I would say, about 40 or 50 feet that goes, horizontally, and it can plant an entire 2 rows of Hascat berries. And then there's another section, again, it's closer to our house, the residential area, beside the swing set. There's like a little playhouse there, and that is where the greenhouse would grow vegetables. So I know it's a little hard, and I do heavily regret not outlining that in my site plan. I definitely see that as a flaw in my application, but there is room on our property to grow those things.
So just to clarify then, Ms. Otoya, so it would be on the south side, closer to the cherry tree side of your property?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay. Good. Thank you very much.
No problem.
Councillor Carlson.
Question for Development Services. So OBWB has pretty strict regulations on septic and what can be built on parcels less than 1 hectare, and I'm wondering why that doesn't apply when it comes to something like this, as opposed to a residential build.
Through your worship, to Councillor Carlson, yeah, specific regulations of the Okanagan Basin Water Board deal with creation of lots, as well as the addition of a secondary home on lots that are smaller than a hectare in size. And the main intent behind those two policies, subdivision and also the secondary home, was to stop the proliferation of residential development happening in unsewered areas primarily. That was leading to so much septic systems being developed throughout the Okanagan Valley and leading to leaching in the lake and LJ issues and environmental concerns with the lake. So it all dealt with the residential development aspects of subdivision happening throughout the valley, and not so much like commercial operations, which are a bit of a one-off. Definitely, before this project would go forward to a building permit stage, there would be a requirement for the ROPE to provide sign-off that there's capacity with the existing septic field, that there's for this facility to be on this land. But the main concerns for the Okanagan Basin Water Board it was on residential development specifically.
Other questions, Council? Councillor Patton.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. On the site plan, to our Director of Development Services. On our site plan, though, it does show a proposed septic field. So this isn't a situation where they're tying into an existing, but they're proposing another septic field on that property. Am I correct in what I see here?
Yes, that's correct.
Any other questions? Could I have someone bring forward a motion and get that on the floor for further discussion? Thank you, Councillor Barkwell.
I move that the non-farm use application ALC 65479 for a cidery at 13810 Highway 97 be forwarded to the Agricultural Land Commission.
Seconder, Councillor Holmes, and further discussion now. Councillor Carls.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Wondering how much of the conversation, the questions raised by council and sort of the uncertainty, how much of that goes to the Land Commission with the application, if any, with this referral?
But typically, the ALC does look at our minutes, whatever is put down in the minutes, like Kendra's typing away, for an application that's been brought forward for council's review and approval prior to. We also do provide our staff report. So they do see kind of the staff planning context as well at the local level. If this does go forward to the ALC, I'm sure that there might be multiple ways the ALC's planning staff can view the discussion, and we could as well encourage them to look at the YouTube link as well if they have further interest.
Thank you for that. So the location right on the highway to put a cidery, I mean, it makes sense to me, and I understand. I do see a lot of risk in moving forward with a project like this for the people who are considering building it. I think we've raised some of those points tonight. And so I'll support sending this forward to the ALC as long as we understand the ALC can say yes, but there's still more process and variances and conversation that will then have to be had at this council table to determine whether it's even possible to put a cidery there. I know that there's a building next door. It's owned by different owners. It's not a very distinct difference, but it's not overflow parking, and that would be just another piece of concern that I'm sure the neighbors have. So maybe there's other ways to go about doing this, but I guess the first step is to find out if it's even possible at all. Thank you.
Any other comments, Councillor Barkwell?
I never expected so much discussion about this application. I thought it was a pretty obvious complementary use of this property. We have a policy that we'll see development between the two lights. The property next door, we supported it wasn't unanimous, I don't think, but we supported that the property next door come out of the Agricultural Land Commission because I think they have a policy under 2 acres or 2 hectares that they really almost rubber stamp removal from the agricultural land reserve. So this property used to be one large orchard contiguous with across the street, the highway. The highway cut it in half. The highway expanded it. The Granny's fruit stand reduced the farming area even more. I think that there's really not much left to be much of a farm. And so it seems like a good location for a cidery. And looks like they're going to do what they can, the best they can with the little land that's left. So if there's going to be a cidery somewhere, I think that's a good spot. So I'll be supporting it.
Okay. Anyone else? I'll call the question. All in favor of sending this on to the ALC? And none opposed, that carries. Thank you, Joanne. (9.3) Zoning bylaw review, housing on agricultural lands. Joanne again.
Great, thank you. So official community plan amendment bylaw number 2022-022 and zoning amendment bylaw 2022-023 are being brought forward to council to provide updates to housing regulations in agricultural zones. As council is aware, there's been a lot of interest in this topic since the ALC announced their changes to the ALR use regulations last year. And the proposed amendment bylaws have been drafted based on council's direction at the May 9th meeting. And that was to allow for carriage houses with for more residential flexibility, to improve the farm home plate regulations to limit encroachment, and to discourage use of suitable farmland for non-farm, for residential purposes. So for the proposed OCP amendment bylaw, this includes a shift in our OCP policy for agricultural designations. So shifting from confining residences to farm residences only, to supporting residential uses that meet the housing, operational, or economic needs of farmers. It also updates policies from developing a farm home plate, which has already been done, to limiting the impact of residential uses by either encouraging use of lower capability lands or confining uses within a farm home plate. OCP draft also adds a new policy to encourage the use of higher capability lands for farming. For the zoning amendment bylaw, the existing use of additional dwelling for farm help in the A1 and A2 zones would be replaced with carriage house use, and the other residential uses would stay the same. And the same regulations would apply for carriage houses in agricultural zones as they're applied to other zones that allow for carriage houses, with the exception that the ALC does define the floor area calculations differently than our zoning bylaws. So we're looking at a provision to acknowledge that within our regulations as well. And just as a reminder as to what I mean by carriage house, so that's a secondary dwelling that's within an accessory building. So it can be a ground floor suite, or it can be a unit above a detached garage, for example. And there's no limits as to who can live in it, which is different than the additional dwelling for farm help. They are slightly smaller in size and are allowed on slightly smaller parcels. So carriage houses don't limit the number of bedrooms or basements, and they allow for additional height, so up to 7.5 meters when above a garage. For the farm home plate regulations, we are defining the shape of the farm home plate to be something that is four-sided, like a typical residential lot. And we're including all areas for residential uses to be included within that farm home plate, like yards and parking areas and patios. But we are also taking temporary farm worker accommodation out of the mix. In terms of the overall size of the farm home plate, that would be staying the same for properties that only have one dwelling. And we're proposing that the size of the farm home plate does not increase with an additional dwelling. But we are allowing for more uses within that same area and allowing for more coverage within that farm home plate area. So as you can see under the farm home plate regulations currently, the size of the farm home plate increases when an additional dwelling is built. And the proposed approach is to keep the amount of land for the farm home plate the same, but that no longer includes temporary farm worker accommodation, which can be sited inside, adjacent to, or in a non-arable area. And it allows for more options in terms of the types of residential buildings, up to a 45% farm plate coverage. The proposed amendment bylaw includes siting options for creating the farm home plate. So you can either site next to the road, site on non-arable land as determined by an agrologist, or use an existing farm home plate. So the Development Process Improvement Advisory Committee reviewed the proposed bylaws and provided comments. So there was concern about carriage houses being used for short-term rentals and about the farm home plate being too restrictive. There was also a suggestion to take an inventory of existing secondary residences on agricultural lands, as there seemed to be perception that there are quite a few out there. The Advisory Planning Commission also reviewed the bylaws and provided comments back, including concerns about the farm home plate preventing some contiguous shapes that might be considered appropriate, concerns about tax reductions for agricultural properties, and concerns about additional septic systems if temporary farm worker housing is located in a different area than the farm home plate. The Agricultural Advisory Commission also reviewed the proposed bylaws. They discussed the 1 hectare policy and what was considered an appropriate lot size, some wishing for a 2 hectare minimum. And they also made a suggestion that the farm home plate option, when assessed by an agrologist, be for lands not suitable for farming instead of the previously drafted less suitable for farming. So that text change was incorporated into the proposed amendment bylaws before council today. The main objection to the proposed bylaws was removing the farm help requirement. And the AAC provided comments that carriage houses should be focused on either farm help or farm purposes only and not for other users. The DPIAC and the APC resolved to support the proposed bylaws as presented. The DPIAC added in their recommendation to encourage council to look at productive uses for non-farmable land within agricultural zones. And the Agricultural Advisory Commission supported the proposed bylaws with limitations on what the carriage house can be used for, being for farm help or farm purposes only. So in favor of the proposed amendment bylaws, we will be moving to align with the ALC regulation, which is seen as a positive, as this will shift to provide more flexibility to farmers by not restricting who can use an additional dwelling. This provides opportunities for income diversification by having potential for rental income And this also allows farmers to meet their own varying housing needs, whether that be for housing for family or farm workers or for somebody else. The proposed bylaws are also better defining the farm home plate to limit encroachment of new residential uses and directing them to areas that have the least impact on farmlands. So as outlined in the report, consultation to date has included internal and external referrals, workshop, and review by the APC, the AAC, and the DPIAC. And the general public will be provided their opportunity to comment at the public hearing should council move the amendments forward. For next steps, staff is going to be going beyond the statutory newspaper ad requirement for notification by just establishing a webpage on the district website for easy access to the proposed bylaws and more information, background information about the project. Using social media to advertise the upcoming public hearing, and by sending letters to individual owners of agricultural property to invite comment and provide information as to what is being proposed. So staff is recommending that the bylaws be read a first and second time today, and that a public hearing be scheduled for July 25th. And that the consultation described in the report be considered appropriate under the Local Government Act when amending the official community plan. With that, I will note that the draft bylaw included in council's package excluded mistakenly one section of the bylaw that was included in the annotated draft, but not the draft bylaws. So I am going to be looking to corporate services as a request to include that correction in there correctly before first and second reading, or as a first and second reading as amended, as suggested. So I will ask for clarification there. Thank you.
If council chooses, or when they choose to read the bylaws, or read the zoning bylaw, so it would be, the resolution should read that the zoning amendment bylaw number 2022-023 be read a first and second time as amended to include section 7.4.1 G C as follows, and then C would be notwithstanding section 7.4.1 G B for a carriage house on lands within the agricultural land reserve. Only the following shall not be included in the calculation of a maximum floor area. And then it goes into section 1 or I, and it says unenclosed balconies or decks. So it's just to include that section as part of the bylaw. A little confusing, I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Carlson.
Thank you. That's clear as mud. Something that was asked last time, and I don't think we had clarity. So currently, someone could have a secondary suite, and would this allow them to keep that and also have another unit? Can we clarify that, please?
Sure. So currently under our bylaw, there's a limitation where you are allowed a secondary suite or a carriage house, but not both on the same property. So that same exclusion would apply in this case as well. And just to add to that, this is something that I think there are going to be some areas of Summerland where we might want to see suites and carriage houses on the same property. But this would be something that we'd be looking at more in urban areas and as part of that review. So I expect that topic will come up again. I don't think that leading with agricultural areas, basically not wanting to provide more permission than what you allow in your residential areas in your agricultural zones first. So that's just something to keep in mind.
Thank you very much. May I follow that then?
Mhm.
So that said, there's a ton of acreages and farms in this community that have existing, what used to be picker shacks, perhaps have been upgraded or changed, aren't within the farm home plate. Are those existing ones expected to get variances, or are we simply grandfathering in existing ones that may be outside of, or do we have a plan for that?
Oops.
Your worship, to Councilor Carlson, I think there's a couple of ways we can deal with those situations that, with the proposed amendments to on the floor right now also allow flexibility for temporary farm worker accommodation. So if it's a picker cabin, that would probably classify if it's still being used for a picker cabin for temporary farm worker accommodation. And so that is now being proposed to be built in to have flexibility to be located outside the farm home plate. If it's been converted into a dwelling and it's outside the farm home plate, then at that point in time, I think if there was an addition or a requirement for a building permit, it may trigger the need for a variance to come forward to council at that point in time to be located outside the farm home plate.
Thank you. So that would mean that if someone came forward with an application to build a secondary dwelling, but they already had an existing picker cabin, we would then have to follow whatever process we have in place to ensure that that is still a temporary accommodation, right? We have to make, because I guess that would be my concern, is that not all of those are temporary accommodations, even though they may be registered with the district as farm worker accommodations. So just something that I don't know how we deal with that carefully. Thank you.
To your worship, to Councilor Carlson, if I can respond to that. Yeah, I think that's something we review every time we get a building permit in for zoning compliance. And we have had issues in the past where someone has proposed a dwelling when there's an existing dwelling already on the property in a different location, and having to say no, that this is outside the farm home plate, or go to a variance process. Unfortunately, you know, that's proven difficult for some applicants, but that's our opportunity to ensure that we are ensuring that there's conformance with the zoning bylaws through the building permit process. So we do try to catch it when we can.
Councillor Holmes.
Thank you. So I presume we currently have second dwellings, farm worker housing that are more than 90 square meters. Maybe not, but I presume we do. And so would those become legal non-conforming residences? And if so, then if somebody wanted to go to replace one of those buildings, they could only then build 90 square meters?
Yeah, so if they were going to, so first part, yes, you're correct that it would be an existing non-conforming situation, so that building would be able to remain in place at that size. If they were looking to demolish that and build something else in the future, it would need to meet the 90 square meter requirement, so they would be building a smaller unit because the use would be permitted under the zoning. It's just the size would be over. They'd be able to make updates like roof updates and things like that to the existing building, but they wouldn't be able to expand.
Other questions? Okay, I have a couple of questions, and then we'll go back to you, and then I'll ask a couple more. The first one is about the home plate. In the summary in the request for decision, it says that carriage houses are required to be within the farm home plate. So I understand that. But that seems to be in contradiction to slide number 14 that shows the farm home plate abutting a road or in a non-agricultural area or a carriage house in an existing farm home plate. So can you explain that to me? Because I'm obviously not understanding.
Sure. So there are different options when establishing the farm home plate. So that slide would be essentially the default is the site next abutting a road. And then if you don't want to do that and you want to hire an agrologist, you have a non-suitable area that you'd rather site your farm home plate, you can do that. Or if you do have an existing area that isn't next to the road, and maybe it is in a suitable area for farming, but there is an established residence, you can use that as your farm home plate. So if you were adding a carriage house, say next to a house that wasn't next to the road, you're defining your farm home plate around the existing residential area and then citing your carriage house within that.
Okay, so then for my clarification then, the option that are shown there are the three different options that you just explained. If you already have a residence on there, on the, and that's your farm home plate that's already been designated, that's the only place you could put a carriage house. The other two options are if you don't have a residence yet. Oh, thank you for bringing those up again. If you don't have a residence yet, then you can do either option 1 or 2, depending on what you want and what an agrologist report might say.
Yes, so those options are for establishing the farm home plate. So the 2 would be for new farm home plates. 1 would be if you're adding to an existing farm home plate.
Right.
So that's correct.
So it just has to be within a farm home plate, whether it's a new one or like the only one or the first one, say. No, not the first one. Whether it's a new one that doesn't exist, there's no farm home plate, or if you have an existing one, the carriage house has to go on that farm home plate.
That is correct. And there is only 1 farm home plate on a property. So maybe that helps clarify that as well. There are going to be instances where, well, even for an example, the first ALC application that council saw today, there was an existing building that is outside of the farm home plate. So they kind of have 2 existing areas that are being used as a residence. So if that was a new scenario, you would, in order to locate in that location, that would be a variance to allow for siting outside of the farm home plate. So any of those scenarios where it's not fitting within that box would be a variance application.
Thank you. I'm going to ask one more and then go back to Councillor Holmes and then Councillor Carlson. My second question is, also in the request for decision where it shows the proposed zoning amendments, the very last bullet says remove the gross floor area maximum for accessory buildings. What is it right now? Maximum gross floor area.
I want to say 110, but I'm hoping that Brad is pulling up the bylaw to correct me. It's in the agricultural, like the A1 and the A2 zone. There's a specific limitation for square footage of accessory buildings.
Yeah, it's 100 meters squared for accessory buildings.
100 square meters. And then when it was, I can't remember. That doesn't matter. It was in another meeting and I can look that up. Okay, I'm going to go back to Councillor Holmes and then Councillor Carlson, and then I have a couple more questions and we'll entertain others too.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to get some clarification on the temporary farm worker accommodation. And so currently, it's required to be on the home plate, but the proposal is that it doesn't have to be or can't be on the home plate. It has to be. It's going to go somewhere else. And I'm just wondering, does this bylaw cover the regulations for citing temporary farm worker accommodation? And how is it decided where those would be able to go?
Yes, so recently we did change under the administrative updates to allow for temporary farm worker accommodation to either be within the farm home plate or on lands that were not suitable as assessed by an agrologist. So this is just adding kind of a third variation where you can abut the farm home plate. So you have to be within, abutting, or in that not suitable land assessed by an agrologist. So there's citing provision. Those are the 3 citing provisions.
Yeah, so the main intent with this policy change is to add flexibility to the farmer. And so you can have it, the temporary farm worker accommodation in the farm home plate. It's not restricted from being there. It used to be restricted of only being in there in our current bylaw, but we're saying, no, you can have it outside the farm home plate. We want to provide the farmer some flexibility as to where they site the temporary farm worker accommodation, knowing as well that the placement of a temporary farm worker accommodation requires an ALC application. It's not the same as just applying for a building permit and then getting approval. So having to potentially go through an ALC application and then a variance process to locate a temporary farm worker accommodation building outside the farm home plate seemed to be restrictive, I thought, to the farm operation. And that was definitely some of the feedback we got from the Agriculture Advisory Committee as well, that this is probably something of benefit to farmers directly.
Thank you.
Councillor Carlson?
Oh, I've lost my question and my train of thought from before. But that has to be on a temporary foundation as well. So that's something that is important to recognize. If I remember, I'll let you know.
Okay, anyone on this side of the room? All right. I have a question about the process that's outlined in the request for a decision. It talks about OCP amendment consultation. 2 things that kind of jumped out at me was the school district. That was surprising to me. And also First Nations, which was not surprising to me. And the local government determines whether such consultation should be early and ongoing. And then in the next paragraph, it talks about having reached out to the school districts, to School District 67, like you've referred the proposed amendments. Have we heard anything back from the school district? It wasn't all that long ago. Okay, thank you. And my other question is, has the same process been followed by referring the proposed amendments to First Nations?
No, the bylaws have not been forwarded to First Nations.
Are they going to be?
That's something that council can decide to do, but it wasn't outlined in the process that was being put forward today.
They are mentioned in the request for decision, and with it being an OCP amendment, I think that there should be some kind of consultation with First Nations. My personal experience or opinion. I'll leave that for now. My final question, at least at this time, is We know that there's the main residence, and you can have a carriage house or a secondary suite, but not both. I'm just wondering how I can't remember what it was called even. I guess it was called agritourism accommodations, that thing that we passed a while ago. How that impacts this. So is that considered separate from a carriage house, or is it the same kind of thing as a secondary suite where you could have a carriage house or you could have this on-farm accommodations, but you couldn't have both?
Thanks for that question, Your Worship. It's a good question. If council remembers, when we brought forward the pilot for agritourism accommodation, which I think at the staff level, we're still considering it as a pilot review of including that use on agricultural lands. We didn't contemplate the short-term rental use also being there, as well as a carriage house as well on top of that being added to the site. So right now, if these amendments do go forward, you would be allowed to have a carriage house in addition to an agritourism accommodation use. Sometimes that agritourism accommodation is in the form of camping or a campground stall, so it might be different than a carriage house use. But technically, we would allow for both uses to occur on the same property. Now, I think that would be something we could review when we bring back the topic of agritourism accommodation to council at a forthcoming meeting. I think by the fall of this year, we were supposed to bring back a report, and it might be a staff recommendation that we make it an either nor regulation at that point in time. But again, for agritourism accommodation for council's benefit, it has to be related to an agritourism activity. It's not every single agricultural parcel out there. There is defined regulations within the ALC land use regulation to define what an activity is. So there, I would say, and then we haven't had a lot of uptake, to be honest, of the use being included on agricultural parcels to date. So that would be another thing that we'll be reporting on to council.
And could you remind us, just following up on that, could you remind us if you're having an agritourism accommodations, that does not have to be situated in the home plate, correct? Or it does?
I don't think so. I believe we didn't make it restricted to the farm home plate.
That makes sense. Okay, thank you. Councillor Carlson.
Thank you. I remembered my thoughts are around the agricultural plan adopted by council in 2008, which is quite a long time ago now. It'll be 15 years pretty soon. And I'm wondering, we've changed the ag zoning. We're creating new ag housing regulations. We have this new agritourism project on the go. I'm just wondering when and how that gets reviewed and done properly with the input that's required in order to make sure that we stay on track. Because I know there are some people out there that are even looking at this and they're concerned that it doesn't fit with the vision that was presented for Summerland and for agriculture in Summerland. And so I want to make sure we don't forget that exists, and we need to also try to follow it.
Brad?
Yeah, I'll maybe start this, but maybe Joanna can actually add to my comments. I'm glad you brought that question up with regards to the agricultural plan. And although it is an older document, we re-evaluated it with these proposed amendments, and Joanna can get into the details of that. But in my opinion, I feel that these amendments actually go further than our previous bylaw did to entrench the policy recommendations of that plan into our zoning bylaw, as well as our OCP. Previously, we weren't restricting the farm home plate to a certain dimension, as well as requiring it to be located next to a roadway. So there was a lot of more flexibility to developers as to how that farm home plate gets envisioned. And we've seen some creative proposals being brought forward in the past. So we're further defining that farm home plate and actually reviewing the agricultural plan. It's more in line with the policy recommendations in that plan. But I don't disagree that it could be something we want to evaluate the future council, that we might want to consider an agricultural plan as a future strategic planning project.
Anything to add to that, Joanne?
No, I don't think so. Thank you.
Okay. Question, Councillor Patton.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. For our director, I did receive an email from one of the members of the Agricultural Committee, and there was about 10, 12 questions related here. Can you tell me if if staff has reached out and addressed any of the concerns that have been brought forward by this email? Thank you.
Through your worship, to Councillor Patton. Yeah, that email and the comments and questions and concerns that were included there was provided. I believe it was brought to the AAC meeting as well. My advice to the person bringing it forward was to actually bring it on the floor to the Agricultural Advisory Committee for discussion. Unfortunately, like a lot of the discussion, and we did debate for a long period of time, dealt with other matters, but we can still respond back to those concerns that were identified in that letter that was provided to council, and we can just do so like we do with any other correspondence received by council for information purposes only.
Thank you. I'd really appreciate that.
And just to be clear, I don't know that all of council got that email because I didn't get it. No. Councillor Traynor didn't get it. Oh, she just got it now. Yeah. So it would be nice to be brought into the loop on that. Councillor Holmes.
Yeah, thanks. Just to clarify, so one of the points that was raised was that the ALC doesn't allow 2 stories in secondary dwellings. I don't know if that's correct or not, but if it's so, then how then would we be able to allow a secondary carriage house above a garage?
Do you worship Councillor Holmes? Yeah, that was incorrect.
Thank you.
Sorry, what was incorrect? Not allowing the, sorry, go ahead.
The comment made in the letter with not allowing 2-story buildings.
Councillor Barkwell.
2 quick questions if I could. Does the Agricultural Land Commission use the concept of the farm home plate in their regulations and decisions and such?
I'll take that. No, they don't, and it's something that has been provided as a best practice by the Ministry of Agriculture. Not a lot of local governments have taken up the ministry with the requirement for the farm home plate. The ALC does not require it, mandated. It is strictly something done at the local government level based on the best practice guidelines from the Ministry of Agriculture.
I can see how it is a useful tool, and everyone's goal of preserving agricultural land and using it efficiently. But along with that, what's the rationale for, well, 2 things actually. Say not allowing a secondary suite in a house that's on a farm home plate, as well as a carriage house. I mean, it's not going to use up any additional farmland. Perhaps provides more efficient use of the space. Was there some sort of rationale, reason behind that?
I can take that one again. Yeah, further to Joanne's comments on that, I think that at the staff level, we do have concerns with opening up too much residential uses for a goal of over and above what's currently allowed in our urban residential areas. We currently have the carriage house restriction of in our urban residential areas to to limit either a secondary suite or a carriage house as an opportunity to add to your property. We saw it as something we wanted to just continue forward because it's a consistent standard in Summerland. I think this is a discussion topic in terms of housing density and probably more in urban residential areas and where we want to promote infill, not on agricultural lands that we want to have at a later point in time with council. I think for now that we see this as a way to at least provide some flexibility to farmers, whether it's carriage house or a secondary suite, to get more productive use of their land from a housing perspective.
Okay, any other questions? It's been a good discussion. Someone like to bring forward a motion? Okay. Okay, Councillor Carlson has moved the motion. Seconder? Councillor Barkwell? And further discussion? Councillor Carlson?
Can you repeat how we're going to advertise this to make sure that people who it matters the most to, which are in the busiest season of the year, are able to get their input in on time?
Sure. So we're going to do a direct mailer to owners of agricultural properties. We're also going to be doing posting on social media and establishing a webpage on the district website, in addition to the statutory requirement for newspaper advertisements.
Councillor Barkwell?
So just to be sure, I understand what we're doing here, other than these technical things about decks and stuff. The only change here is that for us secondary residents on a property, we're not removing the requirement that it be for farm help, which nobody ever checked for anyway, and allowing any type of person, relative help or stranger to live in the residence. That's really the whole thrust of the change, other than little siting issues and stuff. What's the big thing here?
To your worship, to Councillor Barkwell, I think, yeah, you're right. You hit the nail on the head with the big item. That is the residential flexibility piece that the ALC has provided for a secondary dwelling, which is a change of approach, a policy approach from the ALC. Only happened last year. Previously, it had to be for farm help purposes or family purposes only. The ALC says, no, you can have one up to 90 meters squared, and put a size limitation instead of a use restriction on that secondary dwelling. So that is the big change. We're trying to be more consistent with the ALC. That's been something consistently brought up at the Development Process Improvement Advisory Committee, to not have different regulations from what the ALC is providing. And as well, I think the other changes that we're proposing do a good job of strengthening and protecting arable lands. So that would be the other third kind of item in there, is something that we heard lots from the Agriculture Advisory Committee in the workshop. There was a concern of encroachment of a secondary residence. What's that going to be for the existing small areas of farmland that we have on our smaller parcels? And So we're reaffirming that farm home plate and constraining the size of that farm home plate to protect the arable land, but still allowing that residential flexibility. So that would be it.
A couple weeks ago, Kim Grout, the CEO of the ALC, was at the RDUS board meeting, and the topic of housing on agricultural lands came up. And I think it's worth noting, she mentioned that the government and the ALC kind of don't believe that zoning based on occupancy, i.e. saying it can only be used for farm worker housing, would pass the test of the courts, that you can't zone based on occupancy. And you know, and she said you're totally entitled to get your own legal opinion on it, but all the legal opinion they have is you just can't do that. And that was one of the motivations for the change. And really, the impression I got was that, you know, so we don't have to allow secondary dwellings at all. And some municipalities are, local governments are going that route. They're not allowing secondary dwellings. That's entirely up to us. But I think that's basically our choice. Do we want to allow secondary dwellings or don't we? And seeing as we already do, I think these changes make a lot of sense, and I certainly think that we should take that to public hearing. So thank you.
Councillor Barkwell?
So following that line of thought, we have the provisions for temporary farm worker accommodation. Is it really just a temporary accommodation? You know, you know, if that building's not on foundations and somebody took you to some human rights court or something to say, because you were complaining they were not farm workers, another wrinkle.
And who wants another wrinkle, right? I'm in favor of the motion that's on the floor, except for the process piece. I think that in the spirit of what the council is trying to achieve, in developing a stronger relationship with the Penticton Indian Band, it's in our principles, that we should have early and ongoing consultation with the Penticton Indian Band. And if that is not a consideration, then I will not be supporting this motion. That's how strongly I feel about it. Any other discussion? Councillor Holmes.
Well, just on that point, is there any reason we can't send this to the PIB for their input?
To your worship, to Council Holmes, I think we can. I think we have to be a bit cautious with any proposed changes because then they do need to be done before the public hearing or you know, as part of the public hearing process. So we would probably require or request any comments to be provided back to council before that public hearing date, if anything. But if council does move the motion tonight, we could probably move forward with, if there's direction from council, I would say, with consulting with First Nations as well.
Okay, excuse me. Councillor Barkwell.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I know that if we're doing a major OCP review and such, it would involve consultation, but I'm wondering, there's lots of times when a zoning change also requires OCP change. One at the toe of Cartwright comes to mind. Was there, have we we didn't send anything to the PIB for that one, and nothing as far back as I can remember. But I don't remember how many, tweaks to the OCP we've had to make along the way. So I understand what our mayor is saying, but on the other hand, there is sort of a materiality aspect to this change that I'm comfortable with. The proposal to say, please respond by the 25th. I think that's the hearing, 25th. Yeah. Yeah.
Graham.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think one point, and perhaps Councillor Bark was speaking to it, is consultation. When we use that term in relations to First Nations and Indigenous communities, that's heavily laden with legal obligation and constitutional rights, and often that's exactly what we need to do. I think in this case, what I think I hear you saying is to make sure we notify the First Nation. That's good. A good neighbor notifies when they're doing something like this, and certainly we've established a collegial relationship. It could be that Penticton Indian Band comes back and says we want to have a more formal consultation because we have concerns about this, but I think a good way to, given the time frame, is to ensure that we notify the First Nation. And I guess I'm just testing to see if that would meet your need. Establishing a time frame, we would like to hear something back from them, and then whether or not that evolves into a formal consultation would sort of be within their wheelhouse.
In a word, no. It says right in the document, the bottom of page 3, pursuant to section 475 of the Local Government Act, the district must provide one or more opportunities it considers appropriate for affected persons, organizations, and authorities, including adjacent regional districts and municipalities, First Nations, provincial and federal agencies and boards such as education or improvement districts, and whether such consultation should be early and ongoing. So either it says that in the Local Government Act or it doesn't, and it does say that. I mean, otherwise, why would it be in the report, and why would it be in the Local Government Act? So simply saying, hey, we're doing this, that doesn't cut it for me. I'm happy to call the vote, though.
A couple weeks ago, James Pepper from the Penticton Indie Band came to the RDOS, and he talked to us about this very thing about consultation. And he said that the Penticton Indian Band gets tons and tons of these requests all the time. They want, municipalities are sending them, and they want comments by a certain set of days. And he said, we can't respond to them all. And so I 100% believe that we need to improve our relationship with them and continue to consult with them. But I'm just wondering if in this particular case, we are a bit too far into it. And that's kind of what James Pepper got at. He said a lot of times municipalities will come to us when they're already like almost done, and they'll say, can you give us feedback? And we need it in 30 days. And they don't respond. And that's why we get back letters a lot of times that say like, we need more time. So I'm just wondering if we really mean it and we want it to be meaningful, then I think there's not enough time for them to give their response. And that's why I think that our CAO maybe suggested we're notifying you this time. And I think if we want to in the future, we really need to let them know way before here if we truly want their full feedback. It's just something to consider.
Well, yeah, and absolutely, I have considered that. It seems to me that if 5 weeks ago we sent this to the school district, which is also mentioned in the Local Government Act, there is no reason why the same material could not have gone to the Penticton Indian Band with a referral fee. We've given it to them before. If we really want to work on building our relationship and work towards reconciliation, we need to decolonize local government, and this is one way that we can do it. So I don't, I'm not angry at you or anything. It just seems to me that if we can extend that opportunity to the school district, we can also extend the opportunity to our First Nations neighbors.
No, I totally agree with you. I'm just saying that if we're then we need to do it properly. Like I just think that sending a letter and saying we need it back by our public hearing on July 25th isn't fair.
Suggesting that.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So
Yeah.
you are suggesting that we give them more time then?
Absolutely.
Okay, no, that's I didn't. I
If
just-
the school district has had 5 weeks already, why hasn't that opportunity been afforded to the First Nations? That's all, that's my question. And that is why I am not going to, I'm not in favor of this because of that process piece. It's not because of all of the work that staff has already done with consultations with local people and all of that. It's this piece of process that is very important to me, and it's not happening, and so that's why I'm not going to be voting in favor of this. Okay, any further discussion? Councillor Barkwell.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm looking at this, the requirements for consultation, and it's not a must. It's like, who do you think would be affected? It doesn't say serious, it would be affected. And then it lists people. Did we send it? There's some groups that we have considered might be affected and some on the list that we don't think would be affected, and we haven't sent letters. Have we sent anything to the regional district? That's on the list. So they're not affected by it. And so I'm comfortable to say that there's some groups, including the PIB, who are not affected by this. And there are groups that within that list of people who might be affected who have been notified.
So just as you're entitled to your opinion, I'm entitled to mine. I'm going to call the question. All in
I just thought
favor?
I should explain my position.
All in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. Okay, 10.1 zoning, zoning bylaw amendment 10314 Blair Street, bylaw number 2022-004, Z21-016. And this is Kendra. Yes, Kendra.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. So bylaw number 2022-004 received first and second reading at the May 9th, 2022 council meeting. A public hearing was held and third reading was provided at the June 13th council meeting, and this bylaw is now ready for adoption.
Are you first and seconding it? Or sorry, are you, yeah, the adoption? Okay, so that's Councillor Carlson and Councillor Holmes. Any further discussion before we adopt this? All in favor? Opposed? Okay. And now on to number 12, notice of motion. Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just note that as summer gets here and people are traveling, even though gas is expensive, it seems like people are staying within the Okanagan or coming to the Okanagan and driving really quickly on the highway that goes basically right through the middle of our community. And I've seen and I've watched and I've sat and waited at intersections to cross that highway when people are going far, far faster than I would like them to go. Perhaps they're going the speed limit or 10 or 20 above the speed limit. And I think it's a problem that hasn't been taken seriously by the Ministry of Transportation. And I know there's a lot of people in our community who see that there are accidents waiting to happen all the way from Sunoka Beach through our community, all the way out to Sumac Ridge and Matsu Drive. And so I would like to suggest that council request either a formal meeting with the Ministry of Transportation to discuss speed limits on Highway 97 through Summerland's boundaries, or write a letter to that regard to find out if there's any appetite for change and for trying to slow down the traffic. As a farmer and someone who watches farmers in my family have to cross that highway when people are driving 100 kilometers an hour, it's frightening. Thank you.
So did you, I'm not sure if you've had a conversation with Kendra, but did you want to, is this just, I shouldn't say just, is this a notice of motion for the next meeting, or did you want to put a motion on the floor?
I think for next meeting, I
Yes,
think if
okay.
we can discuss the process of engaging in Ministry of Transportation to discuss the speed limits and the risks, especially as we encourage development in Trout Creek. I mean, that intersection by the water treatment facility or the sewer treatment facility, and we're going to put 50 more houses down there. It's just a disaster waiting to happen, and people drive far too quickly. So I would like to start that conversation.
Okay, so we'll look forward on the next agenda then. Thank you. Information items, 4 pieces of correspondence. Anything that someone wants to bring forward? All right, and so we can receive these for information at the same time, right? 13, 1 and 2. Okay, so there are 3 minutes from the Agriculture Advisory Committee, November the 19th, 2021, February the 18th, 2022, and April the 21st of this year. Does that look good for folks that sit on the AAC? It's kind of a long time ago, but. Oh, yeah, that's right. I was thinking, I don't know why, I was thinking, oh, that was right. It was you, and then it moved over. Okay, so can we receive these pieces of correspondence and minutes for information then? Thank you, Councillor Patton. Councillor Holmes, all in favor? Great. Okay, on to councillor reports. Councillor Patton.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Not much. I did attend the opening of the West Summerland Station on Saturday. It was nicely attended with the train stopping with quite a few people on the train. It was nice to see as a Rotary project with the KVR that the Kinsmen were there and our Chamber of Commerce were there and Councillor Holmes and Councillor Barkwell. And then after that, we went and had a burger with our staff down at the park for barbecue. So that was also very enjoyable. So that was all I have to report.
Nice hot sunny day for that. Councillor Traynor.
Nothing to report, thank you.
All right, Councillor Carlson.
I have nothing to report, thank you.
Councillor Holmes.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a bit of a whirlwind past 48 hours for me. So this morning I attended the Summerland Secondary School graduation ceremony. It was great to see it back in its full glory. The modifications they made to the ceremony were really well received, I think. And it was just great to see that all the grads back in the arena receiving their certificates. So I'd like to congratulate all the 95 or so graduates. Yesterday, first day of the Sunday market, it was back in its full glory as well. Packed. It was really well, it was really great to see, and you could just tell everybody, the vibe was excellent and everybody was pretty happy to be back there. And so congratulations to Rotary and to Linda Van Elfen and her team for putting that together. And as Councillor Patton said, I attended the West Summerland KVR station too, the ribbon cutting. And again, congratulations to Rotary. If you haven't stopped there when you're in the neighborhood, it's certainly worth stopping to take a look at the work that they did. So it's a great addition to the community. Thank you.
And finally, last but not least, Councillor Barkwell.
Thank you. My report would be identical to Councillor Patton's. Haven't been anywhere that other councillors have been as well, although I would like to say I thought Bob Campbell's speech about the donation and the motivation on it was quite touching at the KVR station.
Okay, anybody waiting to talk with us?
We have no one registered, but there is one person on the line. Then they're just not listed on the speakers list.
Do you know who that is? The person identified on Zoom is M. Lehman. Did you wish to comment during our second public comment opportunity? I guess not. Okay, motion to adjourn. Councillor Patton, Councillor Barkwell, all in favor? Thank you.